Paul, we're back. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Fergi.
And how was your break? You've been away, which is why we didn't pod last week. It seems like ages. It's probably because it's been like a couple of game weeks, I think, since we podded last. But how was your overhaul shaped up, and how was your holiday?
Yeah, holiday was great. Good first family break together since the little one came along. So great festive period. Back in the swing of things. Back to work now. In terms of overhaul for Sky, pretty good. Started, I think when we podded last, that was 240th. Moved up to 116th overall now. Only used a couple of transfers over that period of time as well. I do feel relatively fortunate. I know
You're always bloody
to do,
fortunate. Sorry. Go on.
to do well in all fantasy games, you need an element of luck as well as good planning, in my opinion. And I got an element of luck in that I sat, and my biggest quandary on overhaul was whether I went Pope or Ederson. And starting with Pope, I've landed on the right side of the fence in terms of luck there, I think. But yeah, the rest of the team was relatively template. I started with Gabriel, who did okay as my kind of differential. And then the couple of moves that I've made, one's paid off immediately, one is pending upcoming captaincy.
Yeah, same. I haven't had the best of overhauls. I've got to say, I thought I did have a very, very template team, but I haven't seen a green arrow yet since the overhaul. I think I've made might be 4 changes now, actually, maybe 3. I think it's 4 actually, and at the moment, none of them have paid off, which is really frustrating. But I have got, obviously players in place. I brought in Kepa and Thiago Silva for Chelsea's 4-for-1 over Arsenal, and over another team. I can't remember who it was now. And obviously they conceded and didn't get any points against City, which is to be expected, to be fair. And I did bring in Ollie Watkins. I was tossing up between Watkins and Rodrigo. I was pretty set on Rodrigo, but I did think that Villa looked a bit better, and it just so happened in the end I had the exact money, 9 million left after making another change,
like it was written in the stars, right?
Like it's fate, right? So all the stuff you don't believe in. But yeah, kind of went with that. Didn't work out on the night, but if Chelsea keep a clean sheet on Thursday and Watkins scores on Friday, all is well again, and pretty well set for the next week or two. But yeah, a bit disappointed. João Cancelo has really hurt because I thought his ownership of roughly 40%. I thought we were laughing. I was rubbing my hands together, thinking 40%. What are they doing? And obviously, we've been proven wrong because he can't get a game, and when he does, he gets brought off half time. So that really, really hurt against. Who was he brought off against? Was it Chelsea? Chelsea brought off half time. I mean, what was that about? So, but yeah, other than that,
Just, right. I was speaking in that. I've got Cancelo as well. I was speaking to Niall Murphy about it during the week, and he made a valid point. He's like, you don't mind paying 11 million for a City defender if they're rotation proof. That's the point in paying 11 million
exactly
for
that.
And as soon as they're no longer rotation proof, then they're dispensable, right?
Well, I'm looking.
I'm
not
going to sit. I'm not going to sit and hold on to him now. I think he's definitely going. He's definitely going for me, and I've got a plan.
Same. So yeah, I was looking at all the players I want, which is quite a lot, for this coming stretch. And I was thinking, how am I going to be able to afford all these? I think he's the obvious cash cow, and I think as well with the fact that there's just a distinct lack of clean sheets this season. Across the board. I think I've got a bit of a plan to move to. I think it's 3-5-2 roughly. We'll talk about a few players who will become popular soon, but. What are we going to talk about today, Paul?
Just going to look at total points since overhaul, give us a best indication of who's on form. Going to have a look at that Man City pile up. We know there's talk about moving on a lot of players, good opportunity there. Did it happen? Who's the popular City players after that? Look at top 1K ownership, give us a good indication of what the template looks like in the top 1K. Talk a little bit about average transfers remaining. We'll look at 5 players I believe ownership's going to significantly increase over the next few weeks. And then just our usual look to the game weeks ahead.
Lovely job. So firstly, welcome everyone in the chat. It's been a while. Dan Cox, evening boys. He says, get it up the period. Julia Wardle is in. Looking forward to a much needed steer after the pep roulette carnage. It really has been like really tough. And that pylon, which we'll talk about now for Man City, looked so obvious. But I think there was a couple of things. Obviously, there's rotation, but we weren't sure if that Spurs game was going to go ahead either, because if Spurs and Porto had drawn, or City and Chelsea, so there was that to consider as well. All the rotation, the fact that popular players like Cancelo are just not playing and things, it's been really, really tough. Shane White is in, Brian Edmondson, Gordon Hamilton, Matt Woolley, John Aconley, Glenn Murray, and Jonathan Maloney. Welcome one and welcome all. Firstly then, let's take a peek at the total points since overhaul. What are your takes from this, Paul?
A lot of defenders on there. Very few forwards. I think we've only got 2 forwards on there, Harry Kane and Erling Haaland, who's the two whose ownership is massive regardless. But yeah, a lot of midfielders, a lot of defenders on there, which is interesting because everyone's talking about defenders not being that popular or not being that optimal just now, but half that 20 player total points graph has defenders in there. However, guaranteeing their bonus points, it isn't necessarily from the traditional teams that you'd expect to see from there. And again, some midfielder options in there as well. So a couple of standout players that I was going to talk about later on, but now they're on this list, might as well pick them up now. As two City players stand out to me, John Stones and Rodri. I think if I was going back to City, and City do have extra games still in the short term, there was a couple of jump on points that Sky managers could take advantage of. I think are two of the best if not the best options outside of Haaland there. A lot of Newcastle players in there. So Newcastle's defence is sitting around about 1.7, so 170% effective ownership. So if you only own one Newcastle defender, you don't really want them to be keeping a clean sheet. I think there was a lot of disappointed. I put a thread out. I was missing the pod, so I did what I very seldom do and put a thread out on Sky Analysis after the first weekend back after the overhaul, trying to put some perspective around why some Sky managers might be disappointed with no rank jumps, having loads of popular players scored well in that weekend. Man United and got a lot of appearance in there. But Wan-Bissaka, who I think will be imminently replaced by Dallo, unless there's an element of sentiment that maybe he might play one or two of the easier games. Has he earned the right to do that? Perhaps. But Casemiro's ticking over nicely, 7.6 million midfielder. But it's really the 3 players at the top that I'm either interested in or hold already. Man United's going to have a few extra games. We know that yesterday the game against Palace has been announced, and it's still been heavily touted. There's been some, not leaks, but some news articles about that Leeds game getting rearranged for the end of January as well. Man United Leeds game that needs rearranged because Man United's cup progression suggests that there's going to be limited free midweeks of which you can put those games into, and therefore a jump on to Shaw or De Gea might be optimal as well to get some extra fixtures out of transfer moves.
All the Newcastle defenders up there, but no passing at all for Byrne, Botman and Shah. Begs the question, are they, obviously they're playing really, really well. They've got really good fixtures still. Do you go just for clean sheets for those prices, Paul, or do you want a bit of passing?
Yeah, so very interesting point. And on the Sky perspective, we're looking at 2 things when we're picking a defender. We're looking at teams that keep clean sheets, and we're looking for players that pick up regular bonus. And there seems to be a lack of players that fit both. And hence why I think John Stones is a good pick, because provided he keeps his place, which it looks like he will do, City are going to start churning out clean sheets, and he's almost guaranteed passing bonus every time he plays, and that's why he stands out to me. Luke Shaw's picked up passing bonus in his last 2 games in the Premier League as well, so interesting. Not one of those was from left back as well, so change of tactics for that to pick up there, perhaps. So definitely Luke Shaw's on my radar. But talking about the Newcastle players, in the short term, they do have good fixtures, but they don't have a volume of fixtures. So short term, next 4 or 5 game weeks, they look good, but after that, they go on quite a perilous run.
Yeah, they do.
So I think if I was in that position, if I was in the position, or what's my stance on Newcastle defence, it would be I would definitely wouldn't sell, but I'm not too sure that I would buy.
Yeah, on from the 11th of February, you can hop off them potentially on Saturday the 11th, away to Bournemouth. Their next 4 are lovely, but after that they have a bit of a break, and then they go Liverpool, Brighton, and City. And there are other teams like City, for example. You can jump on a City defender or a Liverpool defender, for example, or Arsenal even, who will have more fixtures and better fixtures as well in that time.
Some of those teams, yeah, and some of those teams will have that fixtures cancelled that game week for the FA Cup.
Yeah.
But this is just then coming on to us. Hopefully, you get that break,
Yeah.
and then the team that you'd be hopping on to, you've had the break, and then the team you'd be hopping on to, you can pile in there so that like you can avoid injuries, etc. And you're getting your pure 3-for-1s or your 4-for-1s or 5-for-1s even in some instances as well. So yeah, I think on the Newcastle defence, yeah, they've been great value to date for the clean sheets that they've been keeping. Limited bonus. If I already held, I would continue to hold, but I wouldn't be adding to any, I don't think.
Just to touch on the United defenders who've been superb in all fairness, and obviously we were all looking at De Gea and maybe Shaw and United defenders, but for their first 3 fixtures, which have now gone, they do have Man City next. They have the extra game away to Palace, which you'd guess they'd win given Palace's form, and then they're away to Arsenal. So I'm not sure I'd be jumping on yet. I think I'd be waiting until that other rearranged game, maybe against Leeds at the end of January, or the next one, the 4th of Feb. I just City and Arsenal, I'm not sure what you'd expect there.
I think if I was sitting with someone like Cancelo, I think that I would avoid making the Man United, avoid doing the Cancelo to Shaw jump on Saturday, even if Cancelo's benched and Shaw was there, but then making that move midweek perhaps.
Yeah, fair.
All depending on coverage of other captaincies and well-known players as well, I think.
Okay, let's have a look next then. So we were all talking about pile on Man City, this really obvious run of fixtures, but do you want to tell us how it actually played out with the ownership, Paul?
What was interesting was going into the game, Cancelo was on 27%, and then his ownership jumped to 32%. So some people might have thought, like that poor attacking performance against Everton when they drew 1-1 at the Etihad. Perhaps this is the reinstatement of Cancelo long term, and now it looks like the opposite.
And it coincided with Van Dijk being injured as well, so that's a really obvious move there as well.
Yeah, agreed. Ederson's ownership jumped up 5% as well. That could be people jumping into the top 1,000 rather than transfers used in isolation. What was interesting is, whilst the pile-on happened, Akanji was benched and his ownership dropped, so people might have moved to another City asset. But the 3 that really jumped up were De Bruyne jumped up by 14%, and because he did very little or he got 4 points, you'd have thought that that's probably pure transfers rather than people jumping into the top 1,000 as well. So it looks like a lot of transfers were made there. Perhaps Salah to De Bruyne. I'm trying to think of where budget would have been freed up to allow someone to do that, knowing that they wouldn't have been taking Haaland out. And the other 2 that had a bit more bite was Stones and Rodri as well, whose ownership jumped up kind of 4 or 5% on both of those instances as well. I think both are really good long-term options, Rodri and Stones. And if I was bringing in, I probably wouldn't be looking for an exit plan yet.
So the defence effective ownership went up from 64.1% in the top 1K up to 80%. So still not even one defender on average. Midfield went up from 43 to 69, and strikers went up from 92 to 99. Well, that's obviously Haaland, but Probably not as much as they thought, but obviously that will likely have a lot to do with the lineups. I think players like Akanji, I definitely had my eye on Akanji for 8 million. He was in if he was starting, and then all of a sudden he's not starting, and then you're not sure on Ake because Ake has started a lot of games. But when you think of Ake, you don't necessarily think of a nailed-on starter. So I don't think it's been quite the pylon that we envisaged.
I would have, and so definitely what you've said there, and double that up with the fact that City hadn't been keeping clean sheets. If they had kept clean sheets in previous games, I think there would have been bigger investment in their defensive assets, in particular Stones as well.
And I would also think, because I did this, rightly or wrongly, but with the defenders from Chelsea, who obviously proven to be pretty awful over the last week, Chelsea actually had more fixtures in the short term, haven't they? So and better fixtures. So Chelsea are away to Fulham and then home to Palace in the time next that City are away to United. So I'll probably be looking to get rid of one of them after the Palace game. But as you mentioned to me earlier, you need to think about the Friday the 3rd of Feb single game day between Fulham and Chelsea as well. So it's a tough one because they look awful, but they're also the kind of team, I think, who if they can just flick that switch, they kept, how many clean sheets was it they kept, like pre-overhaul, or Kappa got a lot of points, didn't he? So I think it's one of those, even though they look awful, I'm fairly hopeful, having both Kepa and Silva, that they can keep at least one clean sheet, if not two, in these next two. But we will see.
Well, Fulham will be without Mitrovic in the first game
on
Thursday as well. So I guess there's added bonus there.
Looking at the ownership then for the top 1K, Erling Haaland top 99%, Harry Kane 87, Kieran Trippier 85, Marcus Rashford still 81. Saliba 73, which I gotta say still does surprise me. Just down to the it's lack of fixtures, I suppose, in the short term. Even now, still there are teams got a 3-for-1 over them, and Arsenal's next two are away to Spurs and home to United. So I'm quite surprised at that. I think, but
yeah, I just think it's if people are on three defenders, which quite a lot of managers will be.
Yeah.
I just don't see the move to another defender appealing particularly. Certainly if you're not going to captain them, maybe if you're moving them to Thiago Silva because you're getting a couple of captaincies out of them, then I could understand that. But yeah, for me, Salah, even when he gets his booking, unless I'm seeing an opportunity to captain somebody, I do have four at the back, so it could be a move to a midfielder or a striker for me to cover off captaincies. So I might. So I'm not saying I would definitely rule that out, but if I had three at the back and I had Saliba and it wasn't to cover captaincy, for me, even when he gets booked, I would just sit and hold him. I just don't see like a warrant in one or two transfers, knowing that you probably want him back at some point.
I think the time to get rid of him was probably last week. I think I don't think it's worth it now. But yeah, just looking at the extra games, the 4-for-1s and 3-for-1s and stuff. But Saliba 73. Oh, I'm laughing at. Well, I'm not laughing at Saliba. I mentioned him. I have got Vice in my team, Paul. Can you honestly imagine the fury in my stomach when
do you know the funny thing about the Faz situation, and like not funny, but very harsh, is that if you looked at overhaul, like Faz had been doing really well for bonus.
Yeah.
And Leicester went on a really good run defensively in terms of clean sheets. You looked at the overhaul and you looked at the fixtures coming up, and Leicester's first two fixtures were poor. Well, home to Newcastle, like average, and then away to Liverpool. And then they went and then on paper their run was really good again. And therefore the royal you were picking Faz for a long-term move, knowing what price he was. And then I can just imagine after two games that anybody that held him after the 2 own goals was just like, nah, he's out. And then the whole purpose was to do it longer term, and the short term was like, nah, had enough, out.
I was furious. I mean, the first one was obviously unlucky. The second one, I'm like, what are you doing? But it's just like, I had the run in the first half of the season, so I can't complain. But you just think, 2 own goals, 2, not even 1, but 2. I think the only thing is I thought it was -3 for an own goal. So I was expected to walk into a -5, but it was only -3. As John Maloney says, definitely had egg on his face during the Liverpool game. But yeah, that hurt, and that's the one you're saying. They are away to Forest on Saturday, and then they do play Brighton, Villa, and Spurs. I'm having a look. I'm looking at the other options, which we'll talk about soon. I'm definitely going to hold onto him, obviously for Forest, but I think after that, I may have a look and I may get rid because very very like home to Brighton may get passing, but I see Brighton scoring anyway. Salah 71.9 left a few teams. Armour on 58. There's a big jump actually then. So Armour, I tell you what I'm really liking about this is there's normally there's 9 or 10 players in this top 20 who've got 60 or 70% and higher sometimes, but down to the seventh player 58, Pope 45, De Bruyne 43, Martinelli 43, Cancelo only 31, and then Palhinha, Shah, and Mitrovic still.
I think add to that as well, Fergie, that the 5 players that we're going to mention have really low, have really low ownership, and I expect all of their ownership to increase significantly, which will mix this up even more. Like the 5 players I've mentioned that we're about to talk about aren't on this top 20 list.
Unbelievable.
And so it's not like everyone that's taken out Cancelo is moving to player A.
Yeah,
It just doesn't feel like at all. Which is good, really good for the game.
Agree. John Maloney says, "Did Richard Dunn manage 2 own goals in the same game once?" I think the commentator said I think it's been done 2 or 3 times before. I think I remember Frank Sinclair doing it, and I think Jamie Carragher did it as well. I can't remember if it was a third. I do remember Richard Dunn having a bit of a mare. I can't remember if it was a couple, but yeah, unbelievable. 2 in 1 game when he's in your Sky Fantasy team. It just hurts. Just a bit further down, and Edison 18%, Akanji 15. Owners would have been gutted. I think on Thursday. Odegaard's looking like an amazing option. He's actually scored more points in Sky, I think, now than Martinelli and maybe Saka, or he's definitely up thereabouts. He looks a really good option. Havertz, new owners, I'm guessing, will feel disappointed. 13%, and Foden doesn't do it in the league. Gets his goal in the FA Cup, and Cucurella 8.2. So a couple of people went in on the Chelsea block there.
Cucurella's been doing okay because he's been picked. If on their previous slide, he appears on there, and it's because he's got 11 bonus, I think, in that time period. 11 bonus and 11 appeared, 11 points outside the bonus, so 22. So people with Cucurella, he probably has been the Chelsea player of choice just because he's been ticking along on bonus.
Just a quick look at average transfers remaining. Top 10 have only got 9 left. Unbelievable. Top 100, 15.7. I take it, Paul, that you're hovering around there, that you've got a couple more than 15.7. Top 1,000, 19.8, which is very low. Top 5,000, 22.4. That top 1K one, is the one we tend to kind of look at on this show, because that's kind of our benchmark, I think, for ownership and things. So 19.8 seems remarkably low. I suppose this time of the season, halfway through, it's probably a bit, it's probably a bit more reflective than though you take a kind of month or two ago. What do you take from that? Do you just take that there's still loads of people in top 1,000 no transfers left, or 5 transfers left, and there's a lot with a lot higher, or do you think that the range is a bit closer?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty difficult to decipher this because we know through history tells us that those figures are going to increase.
Yeah.
So when you're thinking about yourself and your own team in this, it feels still pretty difficult to gauge where you are. It's almost like for as much as I don't like comparisons to this to the FPL game, do you know, on the elite, how they've got some of the sites or some of the Twitter accounts do the elite 1,000 or elite 64 and stuff like that, and understanding where you're comparing against those players might be a better gauge of certainly if you've got aspirations to win the game, perhaps that would be a better gauge. I just think those figures will continue to go down in the next month, and then I expect them to start going up. And the reason I'm saying that is for a couple of things. One, we've got a fixture this Thursday. Was it Thursday? The Chelsea game away. Thursday. The effective ownership of Fulham and Chelsea players in the top 1,000 is 0.89. However, Mitrovic equates to 0.2 of that. So really effective ownership of players that will be owned come that game is 0.69. And that's not catering for people like you who are in the top 1,000 and own 3 of the players. I'm in the top 1,000 and will own two players that day as well. So there's a lot of people that are going to make transfers on Thursday. We know that Cancelo, if he doesn't play against Man United, we'll see mass sales then as well. There's still a few players up the top there that the expectations are that we'll get rid of. Salah's ownership's down at 70%. We'll expect that to rise. And there's a few players just coming back that people might want to get on to whilst they are differentials because they're so lowly owned and will be popular picks. I think in 2 weeks' time, their ownership will be much higher and people want to take the punt and get on those players early. So I expect the next 2 or 3 weeks for those figures to continue to drop at similar rates.
And just on Man City, I think what makes it interesting as well is that I think we get to see the next 3 lineups. So because of the ownership of their players, there are going to be some people, rightly, obviously you mentioned if Cancelo doesn't start, in the other game on Saturday, we'll see mass sales. But same against Spurs potentially, and the same the following week as well. And not just him. There's other players. There could be, if a Kanji doesn't start again, those bought an Ake, Edison will obviously play. You'd probably expect Stones to play as well. But yeah, we could see some shifts on there. So, and there's a lot of fixtures in January, which makes things. It's almost like you just want to say, just breathe. See the month out, because you can really quickly get into a tailspin with transfers, can't you? And just start hopping about, and before you know it, Cancelo is nailed in the team again, and he's smashing in the points, smashing in the assists, and then you want him back. So yeah,
there was 2 players that we didn't speak about on the last slide that I was going to put a mention in for. One's De Bruyne. De Bruyne's only had 3 10-point plus hauls this season, and with the default captaincy being on Haaland when City plays, I'm just not sure that I would go there on Sky at all. I know that budget this season's probably not as important as previous seasons because Van Dijk's not been playing particularly well. You've not got Laporte, you've not got Diaz, and Cancelo's obviously plummeting in ownership as well now, and therefore your big hitting defenders aren't required, or your most expensive defenders aren't necessarily required. But I just think for 11.3 million, it just doesn't appeal to me at all, with the captaincy default being on Haaland. I'm surprised his ownership's as high as it is, 43% in the top 1,000. I think it's a similar figure overall in the game as well.
And maybe those who didn't go for Cancelo at overhaul had one over on us, really, because as you say, I certainly captained him quite a lot last season. Yeah. Cancelo, you're never going to look at him this season, never, with Haaland in the game. So maybe we kind of looked over that a little bit, and but yeah,
it's easy to say in hindsight as well. I know he has created or been like his XGI's like near 2 for the 3 games, so you can say it's unlucky, but he's not a consistent.
But it's still 11 million, so he's
he's not a consistent tier. Yeah, he's not a consistent tier getter from any of the tiers really. So yeah, I'm a little bit surprised about that. He doesn't. I've got a short list, including players that I own in my team. I've got a pool of 18-ish players that I'm currently picking from, and whether I'm doing transfers, I'm looking at players there. And he wouldn't fit into that pool of 18, regardless if I had unlimited budget or not. Another player I was surprised about was Paulinho at only 25% ownership.
Beast.
I mean, he scored, so that's boosted up his average points per game for the last 3 games. But I can't remember the last time he blanked. Like it's like he's consistent. He's the Idris Gueye, or would be maybe not Harry Arter. He was probably more attacking than him. But yeah, I mean, I know that again. I mean, I'd say he's only 6.6 million, and the counter argument would be, well, I actually don't need the budget, so it doesn't matter as much. And there is an element. There is probably an element of that, but yeah, for me, he's a mainstay, and he won't be coming at my team unless something comes up, a 5-for-1 or something where captaincy is required, and daisy chain him off to get rid of an asset that I own that I don't want longer term, and backfill that way. But yeah, otherwise he'll just sit in my team all season, I think.
Well, let's have a look at a few players then who we are interested in, and you've got a few here.
Yeah, so I've got 4 on here and a fifth in mind as well. So Alexis McAllister, 7.4 million. How he fits into the new look Brighton system, or how he wants to play in the new look Brighton system, is open to debate. Like we all had him, a lot's had him pre-overhaul because of his consistency and tackle and passing tiers, and maybe that changes and he starts getting more offensive points. Brighton have scored 9 goals in over the last week in 2 away fixtures, so we know how Brighton's going to set up. They're going to be going for goals. It's going to be interesting. I think that he's a wait and see for me, and the reason for that isn't because of how good he is in whatever position he's going to play, because I believe he will get attacking returns in number 10 position, or if he's playing deeper, he will pick up returns there. It's who I want to get rid of, and I need to get rid of Watkins and I need to get rid of Cancelo, but I've already earmarked incoming players who are higher on my priority list than he currently is.
Yeah.
They do have really good fixtures, but I think I'm happy to wait. And there might be a potential that Brighton get a midweek game announced, and that would be a better hop-on point for me, because they play a run of Saturday games, and therefore taking a to get the fixture gain is going to be a little bit difficult. So yeah, he's a wait and see for me. But those again who are wanting to get rank and wanting to gain rank potentially and get on a differential early, whatever position that he plays within the Brighton team, I'm sure he's going to return points with some level of consistency. Second on the list, whose ownership's quite low, is Thiago Silva. He was actually much lower ownership than I thought he would have. I think I absolutely got it up to. Did I have it in front of me? It was like 5.6, or was that before the game? I will just tell you just now. 9.4. So 9.4% owned. And it's really not because Chelsea's been performing particularly great. It's his tendency to pick up passing bonus and the 2 single game days against Fulham. I had mentioned there that the effective ownership in the top 1,000 of Fulham and Chelsea players is 0.89, but taking away Mitrovic, who is suspended for the first captaincy game, it's 0.69, and therefore I can see a lot of people moving on to Thiago Silva. You expect a minimum of 5 points, added potential clean sheets, which without Mitrovic, you'd think there's a higher upside for Chelsea as well. And then you've got that Friday night game that if you didn't want him long term, you could wait until then and then move off Silva on the Saturday, or for any host of the 18 teams who would get a fixture gain over him then. The 2 City players I've mentioned before, Rodri and Stones. Rodri 24 points over the last 3 games, 10 points, 7 points, 7 points. You can't account for an attack and return in there, but his consistency at nailing both tackle and passing bonus is relevant and looking for value there. And John Stones, who I think's one of the best centre halves in the world, and probably has been
from nowhere.
I think when think of world class defenders, there's no Cannavaros anymore. And when I'm thinking, even like in the World Cup final, France and Argentina, would I rather have Stones over any of the centre halves that played in that final? Arguably, I'm not going to get into one-to-one conversations with anyone. I'm not saying he is definitely the best defender, but he's up there. And I think if you look at his appearances, he was eased in at the start of the season, but he's played, I think he's only not started in 1 game after the first 3 games of the season in the league this season. So Stones stand out for me. And then the fifth person who isn't on the visual is Luke Shaw. We talked about him earlier on as well. I was surprised when I saw that he was only 7.9 million when I looked last week as well. I think with Man United's additional fixtures, and with some players that people potentially want rid of, as I say, whoever Sky managers have got coverage for Friday night, Rodrigo, Watkins, or Cancelo, that shows a really good option to move to.
Well, those with players like Akanji, maybe Ake, um, do you stick or twist if if you're holding those? Because I think with both those players, they're both 8 million. They're both probably likely to play 1 in 2 or potentially 2 in 3. Do you think the potential upside of the 2 in 3, let's just say, is enough to warrant the 8 million, or would you look to get the extra fixtures from another player?
So whilst City have two confirmed additional fixtures over the next few game weeks, so they've got the Spurs game, which is a midweek game, added in,
Yeah.
and they've got the Arsenal game, which is a midweek, added in. You're gaining two fixtures on City players over the majority of teams in the
Yeah.
league. I would wait until after that run, and then there's going to be, you expect City to continue to do well in cup competitions. There's going to be a lot of rearranged games where City will blank, and those fixtures will get rearranged for further down the season. But I would wait until these confirmed upcoming midweek games are played, play your City players there, and then jump off at a convenient point, and then perhaps come back later on the season. And City goes through patterns of players in that's flavour of the month, and there might be somebody else appeals at that point. Perhaps Laporte comes in and plays really well, and that's someday later down the line. But I don't think we need to think that too far down the line for that.
Do you think the conservation of transfers, to be kind of used in this next period? 'Cause it seems to be a couple of blocks that are coming up now. There's a bit of a like City and Chelsea and one or two others have got a bit of a heap of fixtures now. They've got like 3-for-1s or had 4-for-1s over the teams. That's then going to flip a little bit, I think, and there'll be teams like Arsenal will all of a sudden have rearranged games and have a lot of fixtures. Do you think
The
that
beauty of
the
Arsenal, the,
sorry,
the beauty of Arsenal is that their first 11 to a relative
yeah,
extent nailed, and therefore I think that there's a great chance of when this opens up to jump off City,
yeah,
jump off Chelsea if you've invested in
agree.
Chelsea, and Arsenal would be one of the teams that I'd be looking to invest in at that point in time. Odegaard, Martinelli, Saka's ownership is really low. He's not in the top 28 owned players, and we know that he goes through spells, takes penalties, gets attacking returns, picks up the odd tackle bonus as well. And even like Saliba, Ramsdale, Saliba's ownership's already high, but double up with
Yeah.
Gabriel, and then perhaps even Ramsdale might be a good core for teams moving on at that point. So whilst I'm still at this transfer reservation stage, and I don't think that a transfer equates to as much as it has done in previous seasons. The reason why I'm still holding on is that I don't. There's a few players other than the two that I've mentioned that I want rid of in my team, and I'd probably going to probably want them back at some point. And I don't want to use a 3-for-1 where I'm not picking up a captaincy in the middle somewhere from any of those players as well.
We're still not halfway through the season. That's an
Yeah.
important thing to note as well, right? We're still not even halfway through the season yet. Just finally, before we move on to questions, just thoughts on Liverpool, on Salah. So they're away to Brighton on Saturday, home to Chelsea. I'm looking at that game that the following Saturday, the 21st. I think if you've got rid of Salah, I don't think there's any massive rush to get him back this Saturday, because assuming Haaland starts, he'd be the highest owned captain. But the following one, home to Chelsea, at the moment, that's looking like a pretty good fixture for Salah. And he'd probably
Well,
be the highest owned captain of the day.
yeah. So I have given this a lot of thought, and that's why I'm going to get Salah back in for Watkins. Or I've not got Salah on my team currently, and that's why I'm going to get Salah back in for Watkins on Saturday. So and it's not because of the coverage of captaincy on Saturday. I'm not too worried about that. It's the following Saturday that he's likely going to be my captain, and ahead bringing him back in early.
If Cancelo doesn't start, you can just do a straight Cancelo to Salah.
Well, I'm going to do Cancelo to Thiago Silva on
The
Thursday.
okay, interesting. Give it away.
That's the two short-term moves that I've got planned.
Good stuff. Just a look at the game week, actually. I've got what this, sorry. So on Thursday, Fulham and Chelsea, we've already kind of talked about. There'd be 0.69 plus Palhinha's 22. So roughly 90% EO for players. Or does that include Palhinha's at 0.69? Wow.
I added Chelsea and Fulham
Wow.
together.
Okay. So expect some transfers there. Who do you think would be the best captain out of everyone there?
Yeah, I'd captain Thiago Silva,
Yeah.
knowing that I wouldn't bring in a player to captain and then move off
Yeah.
necessarily. That I think Thiago Silva makes sense, unless you had a goalkeeper that you really wanted rid of, and then bring Kepa maybe if it is partially who you want to get rid of to get on there. But and the only reason I'm really saying this, otherwise I would have captained Palhinha and happily done so if Chelsea Fulham didn't then have the additional single game day coming up as well.
So Chelsea have still got a 3-1 over Arsenal. Arsenal game's away to Spurs. They've also got a 4-2 over most teams as well, actually. So you're definitely not late on the Chelsea part, even though obviously they don't look the best. I just think we have to trust with teams like Chelsea that they have enough quality to come good. Obviously, playing Man City twice in 4 days isn't an ask for anyone, right? But against these lesser teams, you'd expect to improve.
And Silva played in the first game where Chelsea didn't really. They didn't create a lot, but they didn't capitulate like they did at the weekend. And wasn't playing in that game. So,
and he had 56 passes, I think, as well in that game against Man City, which is quite rare in itself as well. Villa Leeds on Friday the 13th. That's an omen there. It sounds like we're both on Watkins a lot. Went for Rodrigo, which is probably the right move in the end. I don't know what the combined EO is for this one. Would you advise anyone to bring in?
It's still really low. So this is what I think that there'll be transfers used there as well, rightly or wrongly, because I don't necessarily think that I would. However, so there's a few circumstances that I'd consider. If I wanted rid of a player and I knew that I was going to get rid of a player, so say Cancelo, you didn't care if he started against Man United because long term you want him out and you don't trust that he's going to play. Would I do Cancelo to a Villa or Leeds player, knowing that then I would use another transfer? So I'm only using one more transfer than what I'd be using anyway to bring in a captaincy for that game, and then move them on to McAllister or Shaw or whoever. I probably would. I think.
Okay.
But only if I was wanting rid of a player. A lot of teams will have a nice 11 based on 18 players that are in my player pool that I'd consider as the optimal team just now. And if I was sitting on that, I wouldn't.
I've just noticed as well that after that Leeds and Villa game on Friday, not that it's massively important, but Palace got a 3-0 over Leeds after that. So you could, if you were interested in hopping around there are fixture games there. Saturday the 14th, we've already said City and United. We get to see the lineup, which is obviously massively important. I'm really glad about that because I think if I hadn't seen Cancelo was benched, I think I'd be sat on the back in the rain for 10 minutes. Wolves, West Ham, Forest and Leicester, Everton, Southampton, Brighton and Liverpool, Brentford and Bournemouth. Not masses going on that day. Haaland captain. Not much else to talk about there, Paul, that day.
It's relatively straightforward for me. Would I push Salah captain if I was looking to try and gain rank? I still think there's better opportunities later down the season.
Yeah, fair. Luke Williams in the chat. He says, "Get Maguire in, Fergie. Nice double for a top tier centre back." We do have a bit of back and forth myself and Luke about Maguire. I said, I think it's probably a couple of years ago now that I thought he was absolute dross and he's one of the worst centre backs that the Premier League has seen. It's probably a bit harsh, right?
I was going to say, have you been proved right in that?
And I think I've been proved right. I was just going to say, I think I have been proved right. But he does it for England. I don't know what the difference is. Welcome, Luke. Just a quick look at next week's games then. Sunday the 15th, Newcastle and Fulham, Chelsea, Palace, Tottenham, Arsenal. Harry Kane once again proving the doubters wrong midweek against Palace. I had a bit of a rise that evening, I think, actually, so I was quite surprised. Not massive, but a small rise. I was quite surprised at. Chelsea and Palace, Newcastle, and Fulham. Some interesting games there for Newcastle, Chelsea, and Spurs. Actually, that could be quite a big day because a lot of after Thursday, you'd imagine that the effective ownership of Newcastle players would be quite high, plus Polina, plus potential for Kepa or Thiago Silva, plus Spurs. So a biggish day on the Sunday. Captain on Kane?
Yeah, well, it will be. Yeah. Straightforward for me. Again, there is other ways in which you can go. I don't know if people would have taken Kane out to make most of additional fixtures. With Spurs playing next midweek, I mean, you'd want Kane back in on the Sunday if you didn't have him anyway. Not that Man City is a fantastic fixture, albeit Kane does seem to perform well in that specific fixture, perhaps more than others.
Next Wednesday, then, Palace and Man United shoehorned in, which has scuppered my plans because I took Rashford out. So I'm going to have to think about, at least I get the lineup, because you just never know, do you? There may be some kind of injury or knock or some kind of, if he misbehaves again or whatever else. But Rashford looks the pick at the moment, doesn't he? And then Thursday, City and Spurs, easy peasy. Haaland, and I suppose if not Haaland, you may go for Kane, or if Rodri or Stones or someone like. If there's ever a game where City are going to get the passing bonus, it'll be that game.
Yeah, if Haaland didn't play, it'd be an interesting what I would do, whether Captain Stones if he starts or not. I'd get Dan to do a poll and then boringly pick the player that comes out on top.
On to questions, we've just had one off Lucas. You hadn't really thought about this. Thoughts on McAllister if he's going to be more advanced, possibly makes him now a worse Sky pick in presuming no passing bonus. Interesting point there. Thoughts on that, Paul?
Yeah, I think there's definitely an argument for it, albeit Brighton seem to be free scoring at the moment, and at 7.4 million, he's still at a good price point. Let's say for me, because I've not other flyers to put out, but there's other players that I want in that would cover future captaincy by bringing those players in. He's on my watch list and want list, if you like, but it's certainly not imminent. And I'm hoping that they'll get a midweek game in January to potentially pick him in and get an extra game out of it, perhaps moving on Almiron or something like that at that point, because we know that Newcastle's fixtures will stiffen.
I don't think it'll impact, my thinking personally. He's still on pens as well. He still loves the tackle. Really good fixtures after Liverpool, and you get the Liverpool game to actually see, to actually look at his passes, right? If he's still bordering on 50 or 60, where if he's down to like 20, 25, you can then make a call. But yeah, I think you get that game, don't you? We've had a similar question off Paul, Sky Player in FPL, asks exactly the same. So we've answered that one as well. Thank you, Paul. DB, what would be your aim for transfers rain after scheduled TV fixtures at the start of March? Oof, I mean, thought about that at the moment. What's that? Another kind of 8 rounds of fixtures? What you thinking on that, Paul?
8 rounds of fixtures out of 20.
So 6 weeks time. 6 weeks. 8 rounds of fixtures, roughly.
8 rounds of fixtures out of 20. I still think 30-ish, 30 to 35. Maybe like.
Flipping heck.
What? No. Sorry, I'm thinking. Based on what a good average amongst engagement just now, and then that would be lose 40% of that. So 20, or go for.
I thought you'd say 30 to 35. Then you absolutely panicked me.
I'm doing rough maths with not knowing how many game weeks that is and how many games would be left, and trying to think of what the average transfers are, what my own transfer account is. I've got mid-30s still, so I'll go for 20.
We've had a couple of comments, including one off Joseph. Thoughts on Rodri may become a victim of Pep's rotation. I just personally think he is world class without any shadow of a doubt, and I just think he's so important to that team that and they have to win, right? They have to win every game now. Man City, they can't afford to ease off. So I think he's absolutely key to that team, and I think Rodri just plays 80% of games.
I'd say more than that. I'd say he plays more like 90% of the Premier League games. I think maybe even higher than that. I would say.
In terms of fixtures, it's interesting. Will that be another? I just had a look. It's another 6 or 7 games roughly. That would be teams would be on about 24 games played, 2/3 of the season gone almost. I think, I think for engaged managers, 20 to 25. I think, but it's hard, right? Because all these players we're talking about, like you just think 5 or 6 very, very low owned players who will be popular, and people have their own thoughts. People will also be going potentially between Salah back to Kane, back to Salah, and all this jazz as well. People will be stuck with crap keepers and things like that. So yeah, it's interesting. That whole discipline is just the whole game, right? It's just so interesting. FPL Foxy, if Cancelo doesn't start, get rid. I think we both said yes. That is way too much money to be holding on to someone there. Liam Rayner, what your plans are with City defenders? Currently have Cancelo and Walker. Tough one there, Liam.
Anyone that listens to this podcast regularly knows that I don't think that Walker's a good Sky asset, and I think if you say if you go and look at he's been a consistent performer for City, and that a consistent starter relative. What would you say his percentage of games started in seasons gone by? Like 70% in the Premier League, something like that. And he picks up passing bonus quite a lot, or so it seems. And yet, if you look at the end of season scoring, he's very seldom near the top of the charts for defenders. I just don't think he's a particularly good Sky asset.
Fair enough. FPL Foxy, is it too late to bring in another Man City player? Absolutely not. We've got lots of fixtures. Thinking another defender, and do we bring back Rashford potentially? Good questions. Obviously, the Palace one. I think the Palace one for me is probably the one I would bring him back. You get to see the lineups. Away to Man City. Though I do, I wouldn't be at all surprised if he scored. The fact it looks like he may be on penalties as well. I don't know if he took it because they'd already won the game or whatever else, but the fact he took the penalty makes him just a really good option and his price. But yeah, I think Rashford should be in all our teams. And they run a fixture they've got after that: away to Arsenal game, home to Palace, away to Leeds, home to Leicester, home to Brentford. 3 of the next 4 at home. And I think you said another game to go in there as well, potentially, isn't there? Is that right for Man United?
Well, it looks like that's going to happen. Like if rumours on Twitter are circulating, and this isn't people suggesting, because of those fixture pelts that are going there.
Yeah.
There's been some. I think there was a newspaper article that suggested that as well from earlier on. I can't quote. Apologies for not quoting the source.
Another Man City player. If you think of the players who are most nailed, probably fair to say Ederson, Stones, Rodri, De Bruyne, and Haaland. Anyone else for you who would?
I mean, Maris seems to be flavour of the month just now, but the way I usually play Sky is I try and avoid. I've not held Foden all season, and maybe that was to my detriment earlier on this season. But then at a point in time of which I considered getting him in, that would have massively backfired because it was at 4 games before the overhaul.
Yeah,
I just don't like when I bring in players. I want them to be like, I've got a criteria checklist, and yes, these guys can get hauls, but they don't tick enough boxes for me. And one of them would be a consistent starter, like you expect to start like kind of 75% of games.
in other games like Telegraph and Dream Team, you get points for part clean sheets, so they're worth it there because you get roughly like a third or half of the clean sheet points, even if they come off the bench. But in this, you just get nothing. All you get is like a slap in the face. FPL Spartans, what are your thoughts on the Newcastle defence going forward? Pope, Trippier, Shah, et al. They're keeping clean sheets, but defenders really get passing bonuses. Yeah, you mentioned earlier, Paul, potentially about if you weren't on them already.
Yeah, so it's this Venn diagram for me, right? And Newcastle are sitting at one side of the Venn diagram because they've been getting clean sheets, so you've been getting returns, and they've been great value, and they're they're in the top 20 players post overhaul. And then you've got the right hand side of, I like a consistency of bonus, so that I know when my player plays, if the team concede, then I'll still pick up 4 or 5 points. I've traditionally liked Lewis Dunk, although they look worse defensively for leaking 1 or 2 goals this season than they have done in previous seasons. Nobody's really fitting in this middle of this Venn diagram just now. Newcastle's fixtures will stiffen are like in 4 or 5 weeks' time, and therefore coming off Newcastle defence is idea then. But because nobody's sitting in the middle there and collecting both sides, that I would hold the Newcastle defenders and I wouldn't use transfers to get them in, knowing that then I was going to get rid of them in 4 weeks' time.
You wouldn't protect your rank by just getting one in for that period using a transfer?
There's too many players that I want just now, and Newcastle defenders aren't in on that list.
Yeah, fair.
I like Rodri's is a little bit more expensive. Stones is a little bit more expensive. You've got Shaw, who's not that much more expensive than Newcastle defenders, and I would be getting Shaw over a Newcastle defender just now, I think.
Michael Haaland asks, is a way to gain rank captaining De Bruyne over Haaland? He says, I own both. I would say that is a sure way not to gain rank. Personally, Michael, I would not be doing that. You've got 10 other players, lots of other game days, wherever else. I would look elsewhere personally. Paul, tempted to go against Haaland?
I'd already talked about De Bruyne a little bit on the podcast already. And look, the people that finished in the top 3 last season overall in the game, I think all went De Bruyne in the run-in, and he scored the 4 goals against Wolves, and they captained them. Like, if you held them, you would have captained them in that game, and it worked out really, really well. So it'd be naive for me to say that De Bruyne can't get a haul, but because of having Haaland, this is like prime Aguero. Like,
exactly,
like
De Bruyne was playing a false 9 that day. He's not the whole dynamic of that team has changed, haven't it? Haaland is there, tapping him in, basically.
I've said before, I think that there's ways in which you can gain rank getting on one of those 5 differentials before others do, because I think that they're all going to gain in rank. So there's a few other things as well. Being able to think up a plan B if you see lineups and something isn't in there that you expect to be, or who you're going to captain, and how do you change that based on last minute news. Or holding some transfers back for when games get rearranged, and either playing fixture volume or playing captaincies at that point in time when perhaps City isn't playing. I prefer all of those tactics rather than I would be for captaining De Bruyne over Haaland.
Cool. Julian Wardle says, Happy New Year. With the City pile-on, a lot of us have gone in, and at what point do we hop off? And we've already talked a bit about average transfer counts. What do you think about hopping off a City? Because their fixtures do go on and on. They do have the most fixtures out of anyone up until like the 4th of March. They've got 9. United, Spurs, Arsenal, and Palace have all got 8. Obviously, this is without any more rearranged matches on top. A few have got 6 and 7. It's tough. I do think because you see the lineups, you are at a slight advantage, but it's tough to hop off play if they're starting. I don't know, what do you think?
I wouldn't be hopping off prior to Saturday, the 18th of February. So I just had a quick look there.
Yeah.
You've got all the extra games. Like you'd made the point about Akanji and Ake not starting every game, and what would I do if I held those 2 assets? I would hold them all the way through, because City's volume of fixtures is if they play 75% of games, they're playing the same volume of games as other assets, and the chances of them getting passing bonus and clean sheets are higher than other assets in the game if they were fully nailed, or if they were playing even 90% of games. So I would wait until at least Saturday, the 18th of February, at which point in time, unless other things come to light that we're not aware of, and new fixtures, etc., injuries, etc. But if I was making a rough plan, Saturday the 18th of February or Saturday the 25th of February, Man City both play on the Saturday on both of those game weeks, so you could move off on assets on the Sunday if you wanted. I think that when the games start getting cancelled, it'll be more around the start to mid-March. If City progress in cup competitions and games are rearranged at that point in time, they'll lose games to then gain games further down. So maybe coming off when we've got better sight of that. I wouldn't be making any immediate plans unless you've got Cancelo. I personally don't like Walker as an asset, but that's more the player and any Sky returns rather than necessarily him being a City asset. But the other ones, De Bruyne, unless you're going to miss a Salah captaincy, and that's where your budget's held. But Rodri, Stones, Ederson, Haaland, I would keep longer term. Again, Foden might be someone that you want if you still hold him or brought him in on that Chelsea game that you might want to get rid of as well for those reasons. But maybe I'm putting my own bias in it too much. But I think that would be my plan if I was in that position.
Well, the reason we hopped on Man City is because of the volume of fixtures, and those volume of fixtures are still there. So I just, if you've gone all in, I mean, look at the way they've played the last two matches. Beat Chelsea 1-0, beat Chelsea 4-0, especially yesterday. If you watched the game yesterday, City looked... That Foden goal was one of the best goals I've seen in a long time. That was incredible. The movement, the passing, everything was just sublime. It was classic City, superb play. And what you don't want to do is hop off a bit too early, and then they turn it on and go on one of their runs, which they generally tend to do in January and February because of their squad depth. They just kind of overpower other teams just because they're so good, and they beat them into submission. You just got to look at the fixtures. I mean, home to like that Spurs game. So after United, they're home to Spurs, which given the form, all City players are going to get Passionaki, and they're then home to Wolves. They then got Spurs again. They got Villa. Away to Arsenal will be a tough one. Then Forest, Bournemouth. They're good games for them as well. It's just the rotation is how you manage that.
To back up your point, but not think of it from a fantasy perspective, Bernardo Silva and Gundogan would get their game for any team in the Premier League, in my opinion. Both would walk into any other
100%.
side. And it seems like it's one or the other for City. You could just rotate. Exactly. You could just sit and rotate the two of them. It's
so they've got an A team out every game, whereas nearly every other team in the league are putting out half a second string at times. So they will just overpower everyone. Dan Stewart's what to do with Cancelo. You get to see the next three lineups. If he doesn't start in one of them, just get rid. Then I think if he plays on Saturday, I'll probably play him, but maybe gone after that. I think if he doesn't start the following one. And final question, Mark Scarf forgot to bring in Rodrigo last week. Is it too late to bring him in on Friday, even though he isn't a long-term pick? Currently chasing a big gap with 37 transfers left. Leeds.
Good transfer. Good transfer count. I'd go back to the point that I made earlier on. If that was me, if there was a player in my team that I didn't want, and I include Cancelo in that, then doing two moves to do Cancelo to Rodrigo and then to the player that I want long term on Saturday or Sunday or whenever the appearance is, and I would consider that. If it's just that in isolation to then come straight back off him, I don't think I would use two transfers, knowing that somebody that was taken out actually is a good asset.
I think I'd leave it as well. Yeah, definitely. And that is it from us for this week. As usual, thank you everyone for watching live, listening, and watching back. Your continued support is much, much appreciated as usual. Thank you so much, Paul. Where can people find you?
On Twitter at Paul McAnulty, MCANULTY.
My Twitter handle is at FFH_Fergi. If you like what you watched, please press the like button. It would be much, much appreciated. And remember to subscribe in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen if you haven't already. And if you enjoyed your listen, please rate the podcast. Leave us 5 stars and leave us some comments as well. Again, much, much appreciated. We will be back next week, looking ahead to Sky Game Week 25. Have a good Game Week 24. All good luck and goodbye for now.